Well, this is nuts. It's like leaking out as we speak.
Yeah, coming at you live.
Welcome back to episode 45 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions and IPOs. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. Today we are live covering the leaks as they come out. Google is apparently about to acquire HTC, or at least a part of HTC. And David and I are hitting refresh on our browsers while recording this on the evening of Wednesday, September 20th, around 8 p.m. Pacific time. Even since we decided a few hours ago to shift course and dive into this episode instead of one that we will do next week that is less time sensitive, there's been new information.
Yeah. We're coming at you live here on Acquired.
So we decided that there's the way we want to structurally do this is we'll sort of state our assumptions about what we know, because Dave and I were talking about it, and we're pretty sure that we know the majority of the information that will be announced tomorrow. And so we'll sort of state what we know, and then if we need to pop in and revise at the beginning of the episode or something, which you will have already heard if you're listening to this, then we will. So everything that you'll hear is based off of some assumptions that we'll introduce.
Yeah, there's some serious time travel going on in this episode, because you guys will be listening to this in the future, obviously. We're here in the evening Pacific time on September 20th. It's already morning in Asia. And so the official news is starting to come out over in Taiwan. And of course, the leaks were coming out yesterday in Taiwan, which is still today here in Pacific time.
Yeah, and the most obvious one that's not a leak, that's a public announcement, is that HTC will not be trading tomorrow because of a large announcement that is likely to significantly impact the shareholders.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do: operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like tabular review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency, since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
Now, David, before diving into these acquisition history and facts of HTC, let's throw out for the audience what we know and what we believe now.
Right. So tomorrow, September 21st, it's looking like it will be announced that Google is going to acquire a large portion of the engineering team at HTC. So they are not acquiring the whole company, is the best information we have thus far. But they're paying just over $1 billion to acquire about half of the employees, and specifically the group of hardware employees. And I believe that's also along with the manufacturing kind of plants and supply chain assets that worked on the Google Pixel phones that they released last fall that HTC made for them. So that is current state of play. They're acquiring about half of the people in the company, but the HTC as a company itself and all of its brands and its own operations are still remaining independent.
Fascinating. And other products, right? So the Vive stays
yep.
at HTC.
Yeah, and not just the Vive, other products, but HTC's own non-Google smartphone efforts. So very confusing. They are going to continue to be a smartphone handset manufacturer on their own, but sort of the A team that was working directly with Google on the Pixel phones and other devices is now coming over to be directly part of Google.
Yeah, and we say the A team. There can be furious debate about who HTC and who's prioritizing what and who they put on which projects. But one thing that you cannot deny is it was very, very widely publicized and covered that the Google Pixel was the best Android phone ever made and set the new standard. And it's that team that worked on an amazing product. And obviously Google did lots and lots of the design there. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. So,
yep.
David,
so
tell us a little about HTC.
Yeah, let's dive into history and facts and rewind the clock. And HTC is not, it's a household name in the US, but only recently. However, has been involved in many products over the years that our listeners will probably recognize. So the company was founded in 1997 in Taiwan. It's a Taiwanese company. And they began life, and for most of their initial life, were just an OEM, so an original equipment manufacturer. They were essentially a contract manufacturer for other tech companies. They didn't have their own brand. And then over time, they built their own brand. But obviously, just like the Google Pixel and other devices, they continued to build products for other brands. And when they first started in 1997, they right out of the gate worked on laptop computers, but then pretty quickly transitioned to cell phones. And this was before, smartphones as we know them today. But back then, smartphones and smart mobile devices were PDAs, personal digital assistants. So HTC actually, this was a blast from the past, was the manufacturer and I believe also involved in elements of the design for the HP and Compaq iPac Windows, personal assistant. Do you remember that one? And then also a pretty popular device, the Palm Trio 650, which I think, if I'm remembering right, was one of the first Palm, / handspring Trio devices that was also a cell phone.
Huh. Yeah, that's crazy. In thinking about this, I always think about there are the few manufacturers that actually made their own stuff, and Palm always occupied that space in my head. As did Nokia, and apparently Palm didn't make all their own stuff, and I don't know. I'm not actually sure if did they manufacture other products? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. And Palm itself. That'll be a fun episode someday. It was, a darling kind of startup tech company in the Valley in the 90s, and then ended up getting acquired by 3Com, right? Is that right?
Palm?
Wasn't Palm part of 3Com at one point?
Well, eventually they ended up going to HP and getting bought by HP after the Palm Pre. Which was that was a shame. Like WebOS was an absolute pioneering product, and the Palm Pre was controversial yet well-designed device, and I think to absolutely languish at HP. But
yeah, totally.
That's for another day. Let's definitely do an episode on
another day. Okay. I just looked it up quickly. Yeah, Palm was acquired by U.S. Robotics Corp. in 1995, and then U.S. Robotics was acquired by 3Com. So it was part of.
Did it like spin
3Com.
out then?
Yeah. So then the founders left 3Com because they were, unhappy, and started Handspring, and that's why Handspring and Palm. It was always that confusion. I remember. Yeah. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. So HTC is in the middle of all of this. I mean, they are like the OG players in the smartphone game here, and even going back to the founding of the modern smartphone game. Obviously, they weren't involved with Apple and the iPhone, although they did own Beats at one point in time, which we'll get into. We also covered this in our Android episode 20, which is very relevant here. This should really be like the coda to that episode. But HTC was one of the founding members of the Open Handset Alliance, which, if you might recall from that episode, was Google's initial smartphone efforts that turned into Android. And so HTC, when what became Android, the artist that would become Android, finally launched in 2008, the very first and only for a long time, quote unquote, Google phone was the HTC Dream, which in the US was the T-Mobile G1. And that was made by HTC. And that was the very first and again, only Android phone for quite a long time.
Yeah. Man, I remember playing with prototype hardware of that in like 2007-ish. And I think that's right. And that was that, or maybe it was just very early hardware, but that was like, it was hard to believe that was the future. I mean, I know everyone was all excited about it, and it's in a lot of ways the same way now that people are showing off like an extremely crummy experience in IoT and being like, IoT is the future, and you're just like, okay. Like,
I mean, this thing, I don't think I've ever actually used one in person. I've certainly seen them. But this thing, we'll try and link to it. Remember to link to it in the show notes. But, so it had like a trackball on it, right? It had a trackball, and then it also had a slide up physical keyboard. This was like, the sort of unholy marriage of like a BlackBerry, an iPhone, and like one of those super old school 80s trackball, mice for a computer.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was like when Android was still basically kind of a open source copy, or perhaps inspired by BlackBerry, before they spent the better part of a decade becoming that of iOS. And it was, at that point in time, like it seemed like that BlackBerry physical keyboard, have a little cursor on screen. It seemed like that was the form factor, right? Like that, if you're that's what a smartphone looks like if you're gonna go make a smartphone.
Yep. And of course, there was Danger and the Sidekick at the time too. That was also inspiring all this. And I think back in the Android episode, we gave a shout out to that Entourage episode where Turtle gets a sidekick, and all this is like so dated now.
Absolutely,
always fun. So HTC, again, like right in the middle of all of this, the very first Google phone, very first Android phone. And then they really stay at the cutting edge for quite a while in the early sort of modern smartphone period. They built and launched one of, if not the first 4G phone that was available in the US. I think it was on Sprint, and I'm forgetting right now what it was called, but it was like they marketed the hell out of this thing. I think it had probably like an hour and a half long battery life.
Wow.
But it was the first mobile phone and network in the US that you could really like use it, and it felt like broadband. I mean, before that there was 3G, of course, but like it was sort of not that much faster than the old dial-up days. So they really were, pioneers of a lot of firsts.
They were. And still, you could argue that the Vive is really Valve's innovation, and in a lot of ways it is, and a lot of the control rests with Valve. And we can talk about that.
Just like Android was, Google and Android and Andy Rubin's innovation.
Yeah. But the fact remains, like, absolutely a pioneering device, and HTC, largely responsible.
Yep. So that was kind of the high point. And I think that was right around, I'm trying to remember, like 2010-ish, I think, when that phone came out. And in 2010, 2011, like HTC was really on the rise, and people thought, that they were going to be a really credible competitor to Samsung, and a dominant device maker in the smartphone era. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, since 2011 at its high point, that has not happened over the last 5 to 6 years, and the stock is down 90% since then. So HTC now, as of yesterday, before they halted trading, had a market cap of just under $2 billion in US dollars, which is down significantly from where they were at that peak. I think they were around somewhere between 20 and $30 billion at their peak.
Yeah. And I'll embarrass myself a little bit here. I was texting David earlier, and I looked up their market cap just on Google Finance, and I was like, whoa, David, I mean, this is going to be really splashy. They have a $58 billion market cap. And then like a few hours later, as you're doing your research, you texted me back. You were like, that market cap is in Taiwanese dollars, and it's only about 1.9 billion in US dollars. Yeah. And like thinking about, what HTC was, and in my head, they still occupied a large brand.
You're like, oh yeah, HTC's a $60 billion company for sure. No, unfortunately for them.
And AOL was a $150 billion company.
Yeah. And again, I mentioned this earlier a minute ago, and we talked about it back on the Android episode, but just like, you can't make this stuff up. So in 2011, right at its peak, HTC acquired, I believe, a 51% stake in Beats. So this was back when Beats was just the headphones, was Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, and they were going to buy this brand and this great audio technology, integrated into their design and manufacturing and supply chain expertise. And basically what happened was, for about a year to 18 months, every HTC product across their whole line, which wasn't just smartphones, but mostly smartphones, had Beats branding plastered all over it. So you can still go on Amazon and eBay and get HTC Beats Android phones.
Beats by HTC, by Dre, by Apple.
Yeah. Totally. So, what did Steve Jobs think at the time?
Well, I mean, if this co-branding stuff, like, Apple is not immune from this. If you remember the first, the original iPod had a second
Motorola
version come out. It was HP. I'm sorry. So they had the Moto Rocker also, but there was an iPod that came out that was an iPod HP edition.
Yeah,
and it had like an HP brand on the back above the Apple brand. It was the weirdest thing.
Oh man, Apple, for all that they really, we're going to talk much more about Apple in this episode, but as we have always on this show, for all that they really are so often at the top of their game, sometimes they just do things that you look back on them and you're like, what were you thinking? So HTC in 2013 divested their stake in Beats, sold it back to the company. I believe, I want to say Carlyle came in and did a big private equity infusion into Beats, and they bought back the stake. And then, of course, it was just about a year and a half later, I think, that Apple acquired the company. So that's our sidebar. HTC, of course, also, as we've talked about, in 2016, in partnership with Valve, created the Vive, which still I think is probably arguably the best virtual reality experience out there. Better than Oculus, still, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
We can certainly. Fanboys will argue that. You can argue in the comments or in the Slack. But again, really, it's really interesting the approach that HTC has taken to innovation. They've sort of been at the forefront of every tech wave that's come over the last 15 to 20 years, really. But they don't do it themselves. They always do it in partnership with other companies.
Yeah, and they can't seem to strategically position themselves to hold on to the most valuable asset as it grows. I mean, over and over and over, failing as a company to do that.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off. And just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So let's bring Google into the story here. And we'll pick back up again right around 2011 when HTC is sort of at its height. And Google at that point, Samsung was really, Google sort of had a problem that Samsung had taken Android. They were by far the most successful, powerful OEM out there. And they did that basically by taking Android as an operating system, but then in every other aspect from hardware design and all the skins and modifications that they made to the Android operating system and software, they just copied the iPhone. And so Samsung phones were, if either you were on a carrier that didn't have the iPhone, which was still a thing at that time, or for whatever reason you weren't part of the Apple ecosystem, but you wanted something that felt like an iPhone, you went with Samsung. And Google, of course, was threatened by this for many reasons. They decided to acquire Motorola. Now, this was for two reasons. The primary reason, and what they said at the time, and in retrospect, probably continue to justify, was for patent reasons. There was a lot of litigation happening in the smartphone world, and in particular in the smartphone operating system world at this point. And Android, of course, was open source. So they needed patent protection. Motorola had a large patent portfolio, but they did actually acquire all of their smartphone manufacturing business as well. And they spent a lot of money for it. They operated Motorola for about 2.5 years, and they released a number of devices, smartphones, kind of at all ranges from low end to high end. Weren't particularly successful, and then they sold it to the Chinese company Lenovo in 2014 for about $3 billion. So they paid $12.5 billion for it. They kept the patents. They also sold another piece of Motorola's business, which makes the cable boxes for your house. So for Comcast or Time Warner or whatever. They sold that off for, I believe, about $2.5 billion right after they did the transaction. So let's say they paid $10 billion net for Motorola. And then 2.5 years later, they sell it for $3 billion, under $3 billion. So not a good, not an auspicious beginning to Google's efforts in the smartphone hardware business.
No. So, I mean, if you're a shareholder right now, like, you need a little bit of an explanation. Like, I mean, today, like, if you at first glance just hear, and I know the details are a little bit different than this, but like, Google's buying HTC, or Google's buying the arm that manufactures the phones of HTC, or even Google, you know, whatever it is, like, okay, like, we've tried this once, so how is it going to be different this time?
Yep. Well, and we'll see how it's different. Ben and I will speculate on how it's different, but there's one thing that is the same history repeating itself, and that's that there was an executive within Google Motorola named Rick Osterloh, and he ended up by the end of Google's ownership, stewardship, if you will, of Motorola, becoming the head of that unit. And then when they sold it to Lenovo, he continued running that unit under Lenovo. Last year in 2016, he left and came back to Google. And so he is now running Google's quote unquote hardware business, reporting to Sundar. And so that division is responsible for everything that they launched last year: the Google Home, the Google Pixel, which we've referenced and we'll talk more about, the Daydream, their VR headset adapter for smartphones, all of that. So it's really, they are in many ways with the same people executing the playbook all over again.
Yeah. But, we'll get to this, but times are different now,
Indeed, they are.
And I want to pause real quick. So a few things. Times are different now. The mechanics of this deal are completely different. And on top of it, it's probably worth talking about the patent portfolio Motorola had. And, there's a lot of speculation, and you can read plenty of think pieces about this. About the real value of that acquisition being the IP, and Google retained a lot of that IP, I believe, when they sold Motorola off, and so then it's highly protective for Android. So there's more to this than meets the eye, and it's just worth calling out how big of a player or how big of a deal IP was as part of that Motorola transaction.
It absolutely was, but what's super interesting is, like, again, that was the story, and then when they sold Motorola, that was the real emphasis that they said on the story. Hey, this was really an IP thing, and we dabbled in hardware. We decided it didn't make sense. We were, I'm sure in tech themes we will get into the vertical versus horizontal approach to a company. Didn't make sense as a horizontal provider of Android to also be a vertical provider and compete with our partners. But now they're doing the same thing all over again. Yeah.
And it's worth pausing here for a second. So, listeners, I think this came out right before we started recording. Google has confirmed the news. Google signs agreement with HTC, continuing our big bet on hardware, and written by none other than Rick Osterloh, who David just mentioned. And the key sentence in this blog post is... let's see here. With this agreement, a team of HTC talent will join Google as a part of the hardware organization. These fellow Googlers are amazing folks we've already been working with closely on the Pixel smartphone line, and we're excited to see what we can do together as one team. The deal also includes a non-exclusive license for HTC intellectual property. And they're calling this an agreement. So it's not, no one's saying acquisition, no one's saying purchases. It's an agreement, and of course, it's for $1.1 billion of cash that goes over to HTC. But okay, so we have definitive news that it's basically exactly as all the speculation was about that, specifically that hardware engineering team. And the other interesting thing here is they have a non-exclusive license to HTC's IP. So does that mean like all of HTC's patents are available for Google right now? And obviously, HTC can do other things with them and license them as well. But that's kind of interesting too. I mean, that definitely bolsters the value of the deal.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, how much of the innovation that was happening in these products, even going back to the G1 and the HTC Dream, the first Android phone, like how much of that IP was HTC's, how much was Google's, impossible to know right now. But I'll be curious if this comes out in the filings when they happen.
Yeah, me too. And I think I can't, I'll say this now, we'll probably talk about it later. Google, you can definitely sense the we've been burned once and now we're going to be very methodical about this approach here. Like it's a smaller price tag, 1.1 billion. Yep. It's just the hardware engineering team. It's yeah. And I mean, if you look at it, it's really only exactly what they needed, and they spent years first engaging with this team, doing a try before you buy. Yep. I mean, this is a highly calculated, highly risk mitigated transaction by Google.
Yep. And yet at the same time, well, we'll get here in tech themes, but they're still, again, deciding to be both a horizontal and a vertical player in this space. So,
David, just plug your ears and la, 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 la.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's go to acquisition category. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
It's quite literally a people, like a talent acquisition.
I mean, it's a team. Let's not call it an acquisition, Ben. It's an agreement.
It's an agreement. Yeah.
An agreement to make 2,000 of HTC's 4,000 people Google employees.
Yes. I'm actually quite curious how the mechanics of this work. Like, I hope there's kind of filings about this. And David, you might actually have good insight. But do those people all go into a sub entity temporarily, along with the license to the IP, and then Google buys that sub entity for 1.1 billion, or can they actually just
I don't know,
give a bunch of cash and then say, all right, these employees all work for us now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I got to assume that most, if not all of that cash is going to HTC, because HTC had huge losses as we've talked about for the last few years. And, their market cap before today was less than twice that $1.1 billion figure. So, that amount of cash is in the bank was desperately needed by the HTC folks.
Yeah, totally. And, this is actually a great segue. So instead of, what would have happened otherwise, this time we're going to do what will happen now that hasn't happened before, or what will happen in the future that isn't happening now because of this transaction. And we'll talk a lot about the Google side, but it's an interesting thing on the HTC side. Like, they've had mounting losses. This gives them $1.1 billion of a capital infusion to do something with their business. They're still making handsets. They're the hardware partner for manufacturing the Vive. Like, if you're HTC and you're trying to sort of like steer the ship and trim down, and I guess maybe you look at it like, well, whatever revenues we were making from Google isn't going to be the long-term strategy, so let's just jettison this team, get all the cash flows from that up front now, and do something else with it. But what is that something else?
Yeah, what is that? I mean, that is the $64,000 question here, right? Like, or a lot more money than that. Given their history of, as we've talked about thus far in this episode, how they operate, the type of innovation they do. I mean, they really are at their best when they're a contract shop. And again, that's what they were doing with Google and the Pixel, and that worked well, right? Like, Google ended up buying that whole team. Right. They did that for a long time, and then they tried to build a brand on their own. On top of that, they had some success, but it wasn't sustainable. And part of that, I think, was probably because they were still riding on, Google's platform. I think it's very hard as an Android manufacturer to build a real brand. Even Samsung is very vulnerable, as we've seen in the last couple of years. But so now what are they going to do, right? Like, do they go back to square one and say, there really is an opportunity, be it in smartphones or other emerging devices and categories, to be a great contract manufacturer? Do they use the resources to go back and do that and build up that team again? Do they create their own real IP? I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see what happens.
So maybe this is one place where I'm a little out of my element, but if you're a contract manufacturer, how much different is that than being Foxconn? Or is that the same thing as being Foxconn? Like, could HTC pivot purely into a B2B company, shed their brand, and just start, doing manufacturing to spec? And when you think about it, like, is that effectively what the team was doing that was doing the pixel manufacturing, or is there actual engineers there on the HTC side doing design work? I don't know. I'm not totally clear on how much different the HTC contract sort of manufacturing was than what Foxconn does for Apple.
Yeah, I don't know the delineation either. But certainly Foxconn, has built a very, very large business on just that strategy of we're a B2B company.
And what I was going to suggest is maybe go for it.
Well, I was going to say, too, in other adjacent industries, in particular the semiconductor industry, like, this is also a very sound strategy. If you're TSMC, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Company, it's interesting that these businesses, of course, tend to be particularly thrive in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, where Foxconn is, because of the proximity to China and the ability to do business there. You can build a great business being a foundry for semiconductors, where you don't do the design. There are lots of fabless semiconductor companies that are either independent companies doing their design, or folks like Apple, which again we'll get into later in this show. It can be a very sound strategy.
Yeah, and I was going to work myself into a corner a little and say, well, maybe what HTC should do is, start shedding their consumer brands and really just be this contract manufacturing shop. But if they do that, then companies like Google will come along and just buy them, so they don't have to pay to contract them. But clearly that's a model that works. Apple hasn't tried to buy Foxconn or bring any of that in-house. The fabless semiconductor companies, I mean, granted, maybe if they took a huge hunk of capital, then it would actually make sense to fab them themselves. But sort of being a horizontal manufacturer seems to work, and HTC could sort of move into that.
Yeah, and I wonder I think the key is we just don't know enough right now, and haven't been able to do the research in the few hours since this announcement happened, or since the rumors swirled, to know for HTC, like, where did they play in that value chain? Like, this is the question you asked, like, how much were they just the manufacturer? How much were they involved in the design? How did that change over time? And it's interesting that, like, sort of counterintuitively, I think in the world we're in right now in tech, when you're competing against Apple in really every category, but also, companies like Samsung and increasingly Google themselves, design is really not valued. It's sort of, back to Ben Thompson's smiling curve. Either you're at one end of the spectrum where you're just the contract manufacturer, you are the semiconductor foundry, or you are, really controlling the user experience, like Apple does, and like Google is clearly trying to do now with Android and with this acquisition. But if you're in the middle there, like, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
Well, switching over to the Google side, what does this allow Google to do that they're not currently doing? It's so there's a couple that let's presume they were just going to go forward with the Pixel line no matter what and really start doubling down on that. And in tech themes, we can talk about why. So this presumably makes it so the teams can work more efficiently together, being under one roof. So you don't have sort of that weird contractor arm's length thing that has to happen. Not to mention sort of if you're an engineer over there who's collaborating with Google, you sort of have two bosses. You're the business interests of HTC, and then shipping the best product you can with Google. So that gets eliminated a little bit. For Google, they can. So there's those inefficiencies where they can move faster. But what does it buy them? I mean, I'm sure they had some kind of agreement where they had access to HTC's IP before, and they were going to keep working with this team anyway, and they were basically just going to defer the payments to some kind of contract that paid HTC over time. Like, what else do you think this buys Google?
Well, I think one thing, if trying to imagine myself in Google executive shoes and in Rick Osterloh's shoes, I think it's a little easy from the outside looking in to dismiss supply chain as like, oh yeah, Foxconn will take care of that or whatever. But I think this buys them a meaningful amount of supply chain expertise and assets. I mean, I think about Apple and how much they have invested, both monetarily, billions and billions and billions of dollars, but also human capital wise and expertise and know-how in their supply chains. And part of that is internally at Apple and their people, but part of it also is their relationships with Foxconn and other manufacturers. Right? Like, this is Tim Cook, right? Like, Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple, and this was his job. Like, this is so important at Apple and has been for the last, decade plus, that's why Tim Cook is the CEO, not Johnny Ive. And that's the DNA that Google really had zero of. They maybe thought they were getting it with Motorola, but Motorola was headquartered in Chicago. You can't make iPhones or Pixel phones in Chicago for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, great point.
But you can in Taiwan and you can in China.
Great point. I remember even when, a few years before Tim transitioned into CEO, people sort of realizing that one of Apple's major competitive advantages is, and this is before they were making their own silicon too, that they had bought up like a year or two of the entire world's supply of many of the components in iPhones because they knew they could justify the demand for it. And so no one else could get that generation of whatever the thing was, even processors to some extent for like many months after Apple shipped something. Yep. That's a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, was it right after the Apple event last week where they announced the iPhone 10, not X, the
Dare we
iPhone
say.
10. Will there ever be an iPhone 9? I mean, that is the question, right? Like,
I don't understand. Like, let me take a quick aside here. So I think Apple blew it. Like, to me, it's like you should have this iPhone X or whatever it's an iPhone 10, but like have it be this thing that's like not part of your numerical line. That's like a sidestep to a new thing. So when you want to start building your generations, like when Adobe decided that they were going to go from like Photoshop 7 to Photoshop CS, and now you're in like this Creative Suite world, like they had the opportunity to sidestep and start a new thing now. And like they didn't, but they half did, right? Because it's like an X, not a 10. So, okay. So
it's
all that
totally
aside,
weird because with iPad, they to my mind, like they did what made sense with the iPad. They went ditched the numbers and were like, there's iPad, there's iPad Pro. You know, why isn't there just like iPhone Pro?
And if it's going to be a 10 and it's going to continue, just do a 10. Like it's really so confusing. And here's the funniest thing is, I was listening to, everyone should go listen to Dairy Fireball if you're like an Apple nerd, or I'm sorry, the talk show with John Gruber.
Okay, so this is what I was going to reference.
So
we'll bring it
good
back to topic in a minute, but go ahead.
So John bumps into Phil Schiller at after the event because they get these press briefings and stuff. And Phil, the first thing, Phil looks at him and he just says, "Hi, John. We spent a lot of time on the name. Sorry about that. Sorry about the 10 thing," which is crazy. The sorry about the 10 thing was crazy because like Gruber wrote this piece like 2 hours before Phil Schiller stepped on stage to announce it. So like he knew, he had read Gruber's piece or been alerted to it, and Gruber called that it was going to be an iPhone X, and of course it was an iPhone 10, which he ate some crow on. But like I don't
understand
Phil,
why though.
I believe you that everyone spent a bunch of time on this. I'd kill to know the rationale because it doesn't make sense to me.
It does not make sense. Like, why would you release an 8 and a 10 at the same point? Anyway, we've gotten way off topic. But Gruber also, of course, had Craig Federighi on a special episode of the talk show. And I remember, if I'm remembering this right, Craig was saying, John was asking him about Face ID and like everything that went into creating that. And I remember Craig saying in response, like, oh, it was of course the engineering team and the hardware team and the software team working together, but it was more than that. It's more than that at Apple. It was the security team working with them. And I remember him saying it was also the ops team and our supply chain was a big part of that. Like you can't make the iPhone and you can't have all the stuff that Apple can do with the iPhone by integrating everything that leads to features like Face ID. That ops and supply chain is a critical part of that.
Yeah, totally true. And man, after seeing that episode, after seeing that that Apple keynote, like to think that's such a great lens to think about doing this episode, because the amount of things that were launched that only work as well as they do because of the integration of like not only hardware, software, and the way that we used to think of it, like cool, you like assemble all your own components into a PC and you build the hardware, and you build the operating system. Like the notion that they control to the finest grain all of the power management and core switching in the CPU and how that works with the secure enclave to do the security stuff, and how like they can do the swipe up from the bottom of the iPhone while the Face ID thing is still reading your face, and then get the signal at the last second to unlock, like all the timing and all the user experience stuff. It's really starting to become so much more than just being the component integrator and the software maker. It's really like the component you have to create the components in order to get some of these really incredible sort of micro optimizations that in aggregate create a whole new class of product that is possible today.
Yep. And that is, supply chain is critical to that. And before this partnership that agreement that Google just reached with HTC, they were really hugely behind. I mean, they're still hugely behind on that dimension. But I think you're absolutely right, and I think as the smartphone / whatever the smartphone evolves into, be it AR glasses or wearables and watches, and I think it'll be probably all of these things. As that technology platform matures, the table stakes for that level of supply chain and ops integration to be able to do these things just gets higher and higher and higher. And I think like the Apple keynote again is the perfect lens to see that through, where of course there was Face ID and all the things happening there between the sensors and the software and security working together. And then of course ops to have all of that sourced and available in, billions or hundreds of millions of units. But also in the processor, again, throwing back to our PA Semi and Authentic episode, that was not one of our more popular episodes, but I think is a really critical one to also understanding this. Like the A11 chip, bionic, quote unquote. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, Apple's, I don't know what's going on with the people who name stuff at Apple right now. Like, keep it simple, right?
It's like you can randomly throw bionic on something. They threw bionic on something else too. There was like some part of, I forget if there was something else later in the keynote that was also arbitrarily bionic. I think it had to do with Face ID. I remember it was part of the iPhone 10 announcement. I'm like, what is bionic and what is not?
Yeah, what is bionic? Seriously. But like that chip is a beast, right? Like it is like it's benchmarking at the same level or higher as
MacBook
chips
Pros
that are in MacBook Pros, not like old MacBook Pros, like MacBook Pros that you go and you spend $2,000 in an Apple store today for.
Yeah.
And that's in a phone on your pocket that is not connected to power, that's running on a battery. Like that is what, when you make these types of investments, and that's controlling the whole stack from the chip design, through the PA Semi acquisition, all the way down through the supply chain and the software coupled with that, like that enables you to do this kind of stuff. And so I got to imagine like you're Google and you're Sundar and looking at this and you're like, okay, we've got the software. Like Google is our core competency is software. That's what we
services.
do.
Like Android has gotten great
and services
integration
and
with
great services. Yep. We're your software and services, but like hardware, supply chain, ops, like we have none of that. And I think as the world moves more towards all of these things that really are about making the devices themselves just disappear into the background. If you don't have that expertise, like you're going to lose.
Yeah. The best way I can summarize this is, of course, as with many other episodes where we're talking about one of Apple's competitors, we drift into talking about Apple and then just like laughing about how far ahead they are. But it really is like Apple's playing a very different game than everybody else. And so, in making their own silicon and having done this for years now, and controlling the operations and supply chain in this way that no one else is doing because nobody else is, yeah.
Well, I think that's what's really interesting about it, though. People say Apple makes their own silicon. That's not true. They design their own silicon.
That's right. TSMC.
And then they control all of the supply chain. But TSMC and Samsung and others, they're the ones who actually fab the silicon.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. And so then at what point did you have to go deeper and integrate that? I mean, is that the next step? Like, is there some optimization that happens between design and manufacturing where it's beneficial to actually start owning the manufacturing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, they haven't, with Foxconn, they haven't with TSMC and Samsung on the foundries. I wonder if it's just like, those services are pure commodities. They're very, very capital intensive commodities. Apple certainly could make those investments if they wanted to. But there's not a lot of differentiation within them. Yeah,
that's a great point. Okay, so it would be
Well,
it would be we'd be kidding ourselves to say we're not already in tech themes, but it is interesting to think about like the features that are now expected in phones. An ARKit is a really great example of new stuff that's going to be available on iOS 11 that takes advantage of ARKit, especially on all the new Apple hardware that's kind of purpose built for ARKit. It's all of these new phone experiences require a new level of design and integration with the hardware that really wasn't necessary before. And so the way that I am viewing this acquisition is like agreement is Google is still a horizontal company, and they need to, they make money, 80+% of their money from, or maybe it's even 90+% of their money from ads, and specifically from search ads. And so, going back to our Android episode, the reason that they create Android is to reduce the amount of licensing fees that they need to pay iOS or need to pay Apple to make Google the default search in iOS. Like that's when it really comes down to it. I think what did we determine that number was? Like $1 billion a year that it saves them.
$1 billion a year, yeah.
$1 billion a year.
Well, $1 billion a year that they're paying to Apple. Even
that's
still,
right. That's right.
Well, but it's interesting. And when they started Android, that was the strategy. But you replace Apple with Microsoft. They thought Microsoft was going to dominate mobile operating systems like they did on desktop. They didn't want to be beholden. It turned out they were right strategically, but they just had the wrong competitor.
Yeah, interesting.
So
for listeners who didn't listen to the Android episode, the core play with Android is own the front door to the user, so control the browser that they're on, control the operating system that they're on, so that they don't have to pay basically affiliate fees for every search that's conducted and every ad that's clicked on Google to the browser creator. And so when you start putting that lens on, then you start to have to think like, okay, so Google needs to sort of be Switzerland because they need to be ubiquitous and have everybody use them. But if this Android strategy is to, make sure that for some significant number of people, they're controlling the whole experience, like Android has to be credibly on par with iOS. And if the table stakes have now risen to the level where you need to do like ridiculous hardware integration and potentially even like manufacture your own stuff to enable the types of features that people expect from their phone experiences now, or will expect in a few years when some of the stuff, Face ID, ARKit, a lot of the performance and power management stuff, like when that becomes completely commodity, like Google's going to be hosed on this whole Android strategy if they they don't have that. And so this thing that they've been doing forever of like, hey guys, like we're not gonna, Samsung, you can make money on Android phones by making them, and we'll just produce the operating system, like that could be falling apart because that's no longer competitive with Apple in this new world.
Could be falling apart, and could be falling apart quickly. And it's interesting also to think about, go back to our episode on the Snap IPO and the narratives around Snap. And I think it's still too early to make a call on them as a company, but what we decided was their fate is gonna lie with, do they, can they essentially paddle over to this wave that is what we're talking about? Call it AR, call it wearable, whatever it is, but it's essentially devices receding into the background and technology just being part of your ambient life. Mm-hmm. What is Snap investing in? What are they doing? Like spectacles, What room is there for Google and Android in that world? Not a lot. Basically, in a spectacles world, whether it's spectacles that win or don't win or whatever, there is no room for Google anymore. Both either at a hardware level or a platform level or at an advertising level.
Yeah. I look at that differently. Like for Google's core business is making money off of people who are looking for information. And I just don't think Snapchat, Snapchat is more, I don't think it's apples to apples enough. I agree with you where it's clear that Snapchat is making an investment and trying to become a little bit more of a hardware company, and now Google's following in suit.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't necessarily mean that as like Snapchat itself is going to dethrone Google, but like think about this, right? Like take the iPhone event last week, or the Apple event last week. You've got the iPhone 10. Which clearly, whether it's this year or next year or 2 years, like they are laying the groundwork for an AR/ambient future that the iPhone is part of or a hub of. You've got the Apple Watch Series 3, which I'm super excited about, by the way, which is like, there is no, there is no phone. There is no, device really. It's a thing that sits on your wrist, and like all the computing is just around you. Then you've got Snap, where you've got spectacles, not to mention the Snapchat experience. Then you've got Facebook, and you've got everything they're doing with Oculus and the core Facebook platform itself. Like, you can start to see a world where like all of those devices and services all work together really nicely. And like, where's Google in that world?
Yeah, I see where you're going there. This dovetails nicely with, I don't know if I've talked about this on the show before, but I think, so Google is in many ways their own existential threat. And I think, so follow my logic on this for a minute. So Google, their core competency as a business is making money off of showing you a list of things and then charging somebody to be in that list. And their core competency from an engineering perspective is, recently machine learning, but, dating back to their beginning, sort of distributed computing, distributed storage, all these things that are sort of stepping stones to becoming like the best company at machine learning. And that leads in many ways to them being the best company in this voice world, where the Google Home and Google Assistant is a really, really, pioneering, fantastic voice service relative to all these others. And so Google's engineering, the things that make them good in engineering, are pushing them toward a future where they don't really show you a list of things anymore, because voice is when it's an output, is not a really good way to ever like list off stuff. It's a good way to like just do one thing. So you tell it to do a thing and it does a thing. And like, imagine if you're no longer searching, getting a bunch of blue links and getting one blue link that's paid for, and it's more like you just yell something at it and then it gives you the answer. And like, where do they start charging for things in that world? Like, do they start blending paid and organic results, where sometimes you're getting a sponsored one? Or do they start shifting their business model, where they're realizing that, well, actually, we're about to be best in class at this new form of hardware and new form of experience that people want. Maybe we just double down on that and actually own the full, user experience at the hardware level.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, StatSig.
Yes, long-time acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on StatSig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers, and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where StatSig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
maybe we should officially move into tech themes here. And this is where, right, like, I think Google's in a challenging spot because they're sort of being forced to compete on this playing field that we've been describing for the last, 40 minutes here. But 45 minutes. But they are fundamentally a horizontal company, and the playing field we just described is a vertically integrated playing field.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I think the horizontal company may be at risk, and that business may not be something they can keep riding for the next decade. And it's hard to say this yet because they're so dominant, but like you could imagine a world in a few years where like search revenues start declining because they're getting the best user experience that wins in search is providing you one answer, and like they need to do something dramatic, and this really sets them up to try and shift to a vertical company. Yep.
But again, they're really far behind. I mean, they have to do it. Like this is for all the money and resources Google has, and all of the threats that we've been talking about. And again, we're probably being dramatic. Given where we stand here in September 2017. But, like if there's one constant in the tech world, it's that it changes, and it changes fast. I mean, even as we've been talking through this episode and the timelines, thinking back on some of these devices, like it was not that long ago, like 2011, that was 6 years ago, HTC was on top of the world. And like coming out with the first true broadband, smartphone, that feels like ancient history now. So anyway,
yeah, I mean, it's I guess the interesting thing is like, how fast will we get to a post-search world, and is there anybody who can beat Google to that punch?
Yep.
And if so, then they got to verticalize quickly and try and beat whoever that is. I don't know. I mean, the counter argument to that is search is an incredibly hard problem. They have so many years of doing it. They have so much data. They've built all these incredibly, really well-oiled systems that give them a, many year head start against anybody.
But search is also similar. Yeah, that's true. But I think it's also they're getting attacked on all sides, right? It's getting chipped away bit by bit, vertical by vertical as well. We, in our booking episode, right? Like booking.com, I'm trying to remember, what was the figure that we talked about that they spend, is it 3.5 billion a year in AdWords? Like an insane amount, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Airbnb spends like, I'm sure they spend a little bit of money in AdWords, but like a tenth of that at most, most.
Because they've actually established that they are the place to go.
Because when you're looking for a place to stay, you go to Airbnb.com. You don't go to Google.com.
Right.
Or you go to Airbnb's, experience, whether that's Airbnb.com or their app or whatever. Or, you're looking for transportation. You don't go to Google and search for, a car rental in whatever city you're visiting. You just go there and you open your Uber app.
Yep.
And so, it's happening.
Will more Zillows get started, right? Where like that was Google's business to lose. They should have just had a amazing search for homes thing, and they could have integrated it nicely with like Google Maps or Google Earth, and then the ads next to that could have been for real estate agents, but they didn't. And then the whole rise of Zillow. So like, what other companies will get started?
And at the same time, like where's Google's biggest bread and butter? It's like, it's buying stuff, right? And like, you search on Google for something and there's something you want to buy and you buy that, right? But now there's Amazon. I mean, there's been Amazon for a long time, but like
there's those I don't know what any of the figures are, but I've seen crazy graphs where it's like the shift of people starting their search on Amazon instead of starting their search on Google for products. That's very real.
Yeah. I think it's super real.
The question is, and this gets back to the culture question, is can you actually change the DNA of a company and shift it to a vertical products focused company? And they need to be good at so many things, because like just being good, like Apple needs to get better at services, right? Because what you actually need to be good at now, and in this, if we're postulating that Google needs to be sort of in a vertical, good in a vertical sense, it's good at all the things, right? It's like all the way down to silicon and hardware,
Yep,
manufacturing and design and software and services, like all the things that they're good at now also.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, this is just purely based on surface level reading into what's going on here. But I think if I saw this and I felt that these threats were real, what I wouldn't do is go in one fell swoop buy 2,000 engineers who I sort of know but don't really know and didn't hire and aren't part of my culture and go graft them onto my company, right? Like I would go find a Tim Cook and give him 10 years to build this capability organically.
David, we don't have
within
time
the company,
for that.
right? Like,
we don't have time. The world's on fire, or it's about to be.
It is. It is, right? But like culture, it's a thing.
Yeah. Okay, this is kind of an interesting. Before we go into grading, even though you're hinting at it, has any company ever successfully done this? And is there like a high profile example of someone that shifted from being horizontal to being vertical in a big way, like a bet the company way? I mean, you get like your best transitions and your best save the company things ever tend to be like knowing that one market is drying up and entering another market. Like when you have Intel leaving memory and going into CPUs, or you have Apple betting with the iPhone. But does anyone? Well, actually, Disney's sort of doing it, or Disney's about to sort of be doing it, right?
Yep.
Like with this announcement of a Disney-only streaming service and starting to pull their content off Netflix, like they're saying we need to be the best content creators and we need to be the best user experience for viewing it.
It's gonna be hard.
Yeah,
maybe IBM. So IBM made and sold devices and products, and then they shifted to purely services. But is that really vertical and horizontal in the same way? I'm not sure.
I think people usually go the other way, right? Like it's like to me, IBM made like they were a vertical company that made and sold these mainframes, and they made and sold PCs, and now they're like horizontally selling consulting services to anybody that cares to hear about Watson.
Well,
like
I mean, as you know, right? Like we all know, but you lived it, right? Like Microsoft tried to go from horizontal to vertical, and then was like, oh, fortunately, kind of in time realized that was a terrible idea. And went back hardcore to horizontal, which was totally the right move.
Yeah, that's interesting. Listeners, if you've got ideas, acquire.fm, we'd love to talk to you in the Slack. Because I think that's an interesting topic, and I think it actually could be a whole new podcast that someone should start, is like companies that managed to make that shift and like individual case studies on how that happened.
Yep.
Huh.
Well...
Man, all this discussion, and I haven't. Normally, I like form a little bit of a thesis on what to grade, and I don't have one. So if you want to start, I'll probably just.
Well, I was I was hinting at this earlier, and I knew when we started recording this episode, I didn't have a grade in mind going through it, but going into it, but through the discussion, I don't think this is going to work out well for Google. Again, we're being dramatic on this episode, but this particular, like this is their second bite at the apple. And so what they chose to do was to buy 2,000 engineers.
Does the Nest
in
count?
Taiwan.
Can we call this their third bite at the apple?
Well, yeah, maybe. Literally bite at the apple here.
Ew.
I mean, that's what's going on. But I don't think this is going to work, right? Like buying 2,000 engineers from HTC halfway around the world that aren't part of your culture, even though you've been working together with them on the Pixel for a year, whatever. But that's better than nothing. But having that go up against like the Apple, what they've built in everything we've been talking about on this show for the last, really the whole life of the company, the last 40 years. I don't think that's going to work.
Well, wait, let me play devil's advocate real quick here. So, the Pixel product is going quite well. I mean, I don't know the units sold, but it's a great product that's getting lots of love. Do you think
How many Pixels have you seen in the wild?
Yeah, I don't actually know. And figures seem hazy. It's in the low single digit millions, I believe, of number that they sold. But my question is, do you think it could get any worse? Like, do you think by bringing this team in house, like it could get worse?
Well, I mean,
presumably, if they just kept doing the same thing, each of these products would get better. More people would start to buy this phone over time, and it has to do at least that by bringing them in house, right?
Yeah, well, but at the end of the day, it's a culture problem, right? Like, this is, you've talked about it on the show before, like this when you were at Microsoft, right? Like, and Microsoft was trying to go to being a vertical company, and you were like, but we should just ship Office for iPad because that's what we do, you know? That's the problem that Google is going to face here. They're bringing in these 2,000 people who are,
is it 2,000?
Yeah, 2,000 people.
Wow.
Who are, hardware and supply chain and device people, and they're coming into a Google culture where the crown jewel of, Google's mobile strategy is Android, and Android is predicated on being horizontal. And so, like, eventually there's going to be, a fight of like, are we going to prioritize our new, hardware and vertically integrated team? And then, like, what are the people running Android who probably have a lot more juice within the company going to say about that?
You should say your grade so I can then disagree.
Okay, I'm going with a D.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, I don't know what I'm going with yet, but I'm going to start talking and see where I land. The counterpoint I want to make to that is, I think they're deciding. Like, I think if you're an Android OEM right now, you better figure out what your strategy is, because I don't think it's putting Android on your phones anymore. Like, to me, I don't think they are conflicted internally anymore. Like, I think they've decided, and I think
so they're willing to go to war with Samsung.
That's what I'm looking at here. I mean, I think their bet is we're going to start creating experiences that, like, you just have to be in-house you got to be bundled to be able to make. Like, I think they're seeing what Apple is doing and saying, yep, we're bought in on that.
Yeah. Well, okay, interesting. I mean, maybe they can do that because, like, Samsung doesn't really have any leverage and they can't go anywhere else. Like, what are they going to do? Make their own operating system? They can't do that. They tried that and it didn't work.
Was that the...
Yeah. Yep. It didn't work. So, okay, like, yeah, Google could play hardball with Samsung and say, like, you're just coming along or you're dead.
Can Google make enough phones? Like, that's another interesting question. It's like, how many people,
right.
Like, how many people buy Samsung phones? Does Samsung make their own phones? Are they their own manufacturer?
I believe so.
Yeah, so like,
even if they're not, they have a deep enough relationship with the Foxcons of the world that, like,
right.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, Pixel's a great phone, but I've never seen one in public, and I've seen millions and millions of iPhones and Galaxies.
I think 2 years from now we'll revisit this and go, wow, Google's ecosystem of OEM partners dried up fast.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a
transition. But who's going to make the phones then?
I mean, well, there's going to be all this capacity, right? Like, if Google starts to shift this way, like, there's a lot of people that need to make a lot of phones that are suddenly going to be available.
Yep.
And I mean, maybe Samsung does, and Google just commoditizes Samsung even further.
Or maybe Apple just, like, really continues to dominate in this world. Like, they have capacity. Like, their supply chain is the best in the world.
Yeah. Well, so here's kind of a funny thing is this is the same price of Instagram, right? So it's funny to, like, make this little apples to apples comparison of, like, which would you have rather bought?
Yeah.
But, and one other lens that I want to look through it as is, if you are HTC, there's two other lenses. One is, I think it's about $500K per head. So that's kind of an interesting stat to look at. Lots of talent
interesting.
acquisitions are $1 million an engineer, and obviously these aren't all engineers, but that's kind of an interesting. If it's 2,000 people, then it's $500K per head, and it comes with this access to the patent portfolio. So it's interesting. It's not that expensive. The other thing is we have no idea what the deal looked like between HTC and Google going forward. But you have to assume that if you're HTC, or what the terms of their contracting agreement was to make the phones. But you have to assume if you're HTC, then basically you're doing some kind of sum of future cash flows here, and saying like, well, over the next 4 years, you're going to make this much revenue from this thing. So yeah, we're fine with it being worth 1.1 billion. And impossible for us to know what the cash flows would have looked like, but something tells me this actually isn't that expensive for Google. No,
1.1 billion to Google is nothing.
Oh, and I mean from the perspective of like what the alternative was in terms of paying HTC out over time. Like I think HTC has so little leverage and needs cash that they're very willing to do a deal here. And I don't think they looked at the work they were doing for Google as their core competency anyway. And I'm speculating here, but I think Google, if they can do this integration well, got a pretty good deal on hiring 2,000 people that are strategically, perfectly trained to do the thing that Google needs to do. And I really do think Google needs to do this, and Android needs to become much more like the iPhone. So Android and Pixel phones kind of need to become one. And if that's the plan, and if Google's going to actually execute that, I think this is a great move. Hard to grade because I think there's lots and lots of variance on where it could go.
The
but
question is,
I
don't think we're actually saying
B,
anything. I don't think we're saying anything that different. I'm just super skeptical that this is going to work.
But do you think they're actually going to go the direction of de-horizontalizing Android to all the OEMs?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they kind of have to, right? Like, you can't compete with what Apple's doing if you in the current Android ecosystem.
Yeah, unless you believe none of the things that they're doing to optimize matter. But I think that's the death by a thousand cuts if you don't.
But I think also like Google has clearly shown that they do believe that like AR and ambient computing is the future. And if you believe that, then that doesn't work in the Android ecosystem as is.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that Google's doubling down with Google Home and they're doing Daydream and they're releasing their own phones, like they're becoming a hardware company, and this is going to dramatically help them.
Yep.
So it's going to be somewhere between a B and a C, but I'm trending closer to a B at this point in time.
Wow. All right. Disagreement.
Yep.
Cool. Carve Out?
Yeah. I'm a huge Odessa fan. If you're into sort of like ambient trap, like powerful, sit in a concert and bob your head. It's an awesome band. Really great to listen to while you're working, while you're running. And they're actually from Bainbridge Island, which is pretty cool, from the Seattle area.
Cool. I didn't know that.
And they are. And they just came out with a new album, and it is awesome. And I think there's this great Pitchfork quote from the review that I want to read real quick that describes the album very well. And you can choose, this may or may not appeal to you, but they nail it by saying, it derives its power from its supersized subtlety, exaggerated gestures, a kind of weaponized softness. And the album is called A Moment Apart. So if that sounds like your jam, go check it out. It's a great listen.
Wow. Weaponized softness.
I know. That in itself is like an album name.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Well, you've inspired me. I'm going to call an audible, do not what I wanted to, but music has inspired me. I listened to recently. This was actually, I think this was replaced in the feed on Fresh Air with Terry Gross on NPR on their podcast. They just re-released an interview that she did about a year ago with Bruce Springsteen, and it's great. Done in his studio, in his home studio in New Jersey. Just talking about, he'd written an autobiography that had come out, and he's now doing a one-man show on Broadway. That'll be premiering soon, which I think is why they re-released this interview. And it's just really cool. He talks about his persona of Bruce Springsteen, and that like I always just assume that like Bruce Springsteen is Bruce Springsteen, but like the real Bruce Springsteen is not that much like, the Bruce Springsteen that you see on stage. And he talks about like where that persona came from, and how it's shaped his life. So really, really great interview. He's a very, very smart guy, and has lived an amazing life. So highly recommend.
Oh, very cool. Well, listeners, that's it. If you aren't subscribed and you want to hear more, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast client. And if you feel so inclined, we would love a review on iTunes. Feel free to join us in the Slack at acquired.fm. And that's all we've got. So thanks for listening. And, enjoy your own speculation. Drop us a link in the Slack if we miss anything.
Great. We'll see you next time.
Later.